to the Insomniac Show with Nicolette and Brian. We'll get real deep with you, educating, inspiring, and solving problems with some of the most inspirational humans on the planet. Buckle up and come on the journey.
I'm excited. All right. I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Glenn Perry. He is the vice president of Samadhi Tank. It is a flotation tank company, and we are going to learn a little bit about the benefits and the cool technology that we can reap the benefits of. So thank you so much for joining us, Glenn. We're excited to talk about this.
Thanks for having me on your show, Nicolette.
So, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and kind of your journey to Samadhi Tank? And I understand you and Lee, created the first commercial flotation tank. When was this? 1974, if I read that correctly.
Yes.
That was a while before it kind of became a thing, right? How did that start?
We made it the thing. So I was very shy, neurotic kid. And by 1972, I needed to do something to change my life. And a friend of mine gave me a book by John Lilly, Center of the Cyclone. And he was the inventor of the isolation tank. Uh-huh. And I was so impressed by his book because at the time, to me, if you couldn't touch it, it wasn't real. And he spoke about all these different things from a Western scientific point of view that were amazing. And a couple of weeks later, I saw an ad for a 5-day workshop he was giving. And I went, and I was the first one to float. And at work, if I went to the cafeteria with 2 people, I wouldn't open my mouth. If there was one person, I would say something. And at the end of the float, I came out, and the universe was this incredible, scintillating, shimmering energy system. And time changed. And John asked me to share my experience with the group. And I was comfortable doing that. I could not believe that I could be comfortable talking to a group of people. Right then, I had to have my own, and nobody was making them. By the end of the week, floating other times and talking to other people who had floated, I realized that other people were going to want to have a tank also. And so I asked John what he thought of me making tanks for other people. And he loved the idea because he was a scientist, a researcher, researching the nature of consciousness. That's how he spent his life. And he gave us the name Samadhi. And when I met Lee, we started doing it full time. And I didn't float very well. When John invented the tank, it was 8 by 8 by 8. And it was, you had material equipment on, and he quickly realized he could get away from that by having 20 inches of water and bend at the knees and have your feet on the floor, and you do what he referred to as dolphin breathing. You'd inhale and hold your breath. And then when you needed another breath, you'd exhale and inhale quickly. And that way your body could float in fresh water. Well, he didn't have a real tight body, but I did. So it was compact and I didn't float near as well.
Especially in fresh water, right? Because most float tanks are salt water. Yeah.
Well, that's what we're getting to.
Okay.
So he told me when he gave me the specs that in the Virgin Islands, he had the ocean going through the tank. And so I could add 3% sodium chloride salt to the tank and float better. Well, since I didn't float well at all, I added enough so that I didn't have to put my feet on the floor, but I could be totally at the surface without worrying about my breathing. And so now I was floating completely weightless, like an astronaut floating in space. And so we renamed it, instead of isolation tank, a flotation tank. And that's how we invented it.
That's
Isolation.
That's really cool. I mean, I know Nicolette was telling you, I was excited. I'm excited to meet you because I love floating. I mean, I do it mostly in the ocean, because I'm lucky enough to live very close to the ocean, although it's the Atlantic. So it's, the Northern Atlantic. So it's not quite as salty as the Caribbean, because I love the Caribbean for that exact reason, and I'm one of those people. I'm like, I don't care if I get eaten by sharks. I'm going to float out here for an hour. Whatever happens to me, happens to me. I throw myself into the universe, close my eyes and float. I mean, to me, it's amazing.
Do you do scuba diving?
I don't actually. I just like floating in the ocean. I don't know. There's something about floating.
That's wonderful.
Well, you know what I want to let the users know, because, I have this idea. I've never seen a flotation tank, but maybe you could explain. I'm assuming that's one right behind you, correct?
Exactly.
The flotation tank.
Yes.
And maybe you can just give us some insight into exactly what a user does when they get to the tank.
Sure. Well, as you can see, it's a little bit larger around than a twin size bed and chest high, and it contains 10 inches of water. And in this one, there's 700 pounds of Epsom salt dissolved in the water. So it is 25% heavier than fresh water. So you go in, you lie face up in the solution, and this salt water pushes you to the surface. So you float right on the surface like a cork.
Mm-hmm.
And you can leave the door open, or if you want to get rid of the distractions of noise and light, you can close the door. Many people, before they use the tank the first time, have some fear. And what we tell them in the orientation is that the important thing to realize is that you are in charge of the situation. You can get in and out whenever you want. You can leave the door open. Whatever you do, you should do it in a way that's comfortable for you.
Okay.
So how important, because I also, now I guess I got two questions, right? The first is, that's a lot of Epsom salt. I didn't realize you needed that much Epsom salt for that much water to float. Because I do Epsom salt baths on my float, but I sure as hell don't put 700 pounds in it.
Well, your bathtub, it probably isn't quite as big either.
No, it's not.
But still, you're not putting 100 pounds in. You're putting 5 pounds or something.
Yeah, I'm putting like 3 or 5 pounds exactly. And it's not, you're not truly buoyant. You're sort of buoyant. You know what I mean? Like, just my face is sitting above the water, usually like this much, so I could breathe. But how important is the darkness, right? Because I like it, like when I do that at home and in flotation tanks, I love it completely black. Like, to me, that actually is sort of what almost gets you past, or at least having your eyes completely closed in that experience. How important is the darkness, or the disconnecting from the rest of the universe, right? And all the distractions.
Well, have either of you meditated?
I do, yeah.
Okay. So a lot of meditators, and myself included, it's like there are all these distractions, the body sensations, noises, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And in the tank, there's none of that. So if you close the door. And so ultimately, most people close the door and remove all distractions. The temperature is at skin temperature, so you don't feel hot nor cold. You, you simply become like a point of consciousness.
Mhm.
And longtime meditators say, wow, finally, it's so easy to meditate.
Mhm.
This is so, I can get so much further here than I can in a sitting meditation. Everybody loves to meditate in the tank. It's a perfect place because of the lack of distractions. And without distractions, we can focus on anything. With this incessant mental chatter that we all have all the time, we're thinking about the past, we're worrying about the future. We don't take our time to process things that happen or plan things in the future or deal with our projects or relationships. But in the tank, you can do that. So the mental chatter after a while simply subsides.
Mhm.
And you have time to think and reflect, and you have real peace of mind. It's amazing.
I agree. It's one of my favorite things to do. So you have I'm a fan already of these things.
So
Nicolette
what I'd
probably
like
needs a
to
little more meditation though.
what I'd like to, yeah, what I'd like to know is, you talk also about professional athletes using this and creators, and we are always talking about creativity here. What is the link then between floating and what's that connection between the tanks and creativity? How does that work?
Well, you mentioned athletes. Tom Brady yesterday won the Super Bowl, and he has one in his home.
Hmm.
And Steph Curry also floats, and he says that he the serenity leads to clarity and focus. That without the distractions, he's able to visualize uh, his shots. You talk about creativity. For me, that's probably by far the most important thing I use the tank for. Michael Crichton, who created Jurassic Park and is one of the most prolific writers there was. He has sold over 200 million books. He came and floated in our center in Beverly Hills in 1980 because he had writer's block. He couldn't write. He had one of his movies had just come out, and he went into the tank hoping to handle his writer's block. He did, in fact, solve that. He found out that since for the first time he was paid money beforehand, his system didn't feel he had to write. Once he realized that, he now broke his writer's block and was able to start writing. And he immediately bought one for his home. And he went on, he told us about how the arc of stories would come to him while he was floating. So by getting rid of mental chatter, we move into our heart and become present. And I think that's where creativity comes from. You hear of people who in being creative have a problem that they can't solve, and they'll do all sorts of things, go for a walk,
Mhm.
something to get rid of this mental chatter and become present. And then ideas come to them. Tesla was incredible at that. Edison, he was always in his mind, and he had to do 1,000 bulbs before it worked for him or something. But people who are present, it just happens. I am 20 times as creative as I was 40 years ago when I started floating.
Right. And I think a really simple example is like we all talk about like shower thoughts, right? That's a really mild example. Like you get into that zone. And to me, it's sort of like that, like, and I'm gonna get all meditative here, but like when I float, I believe like, and I get very creative after it and actually energized too, right? After I float. But it's almost like you're connecting with that cosmic intelligence or whatever you want to call it, I mean, everyone calls it something different, but it's almost like you just feel like you're thinking through your problems. You're so isolated. You're almost like downloading stuff into your brain. It's pretty crazy.
Completely. Yes.
Well, and it speaking of, I do have showers, so I'm not very good with the meditating, right? But I do have those shower thoughts. So at least I'm somewhere. I'm there.
I was
right?
relating it for Nicolette.
Yes, I do. I get in the shower. I'm like, oh my goodness, I get all these great ideas. No pen, no nothing. Just
I know.
all wet.
I'm working on a book, and I sent it to Nicolette, and she was like, "This is a little trippy," because it was talking about like time and connection and all this other stuff that's sort of in that meditative state. And she was like, "This is a little trippy."
I think I need some psychedelics to go with this chapter, Brian.
Well, you've solved a problem I've been wondering about for some time, and that is, in the 46 years, actually, it's close to 49 now that I've been floating. I've for lots of periods of time I've floated every day. So every time I finish floating, I shower, because with that much salt, you have to shower afterwards. And so I often am getting ideas in the shower,
Mhm.
whether I float or not. And I couldn't figure out, is that because it's become a trigger
Mhm.
to being after floating, or would it happen anyway? And you've just solved that. It would happen anyway.
You know what? There's nothing else there for me to do in that moment. It's kind of, and I will admit, I do kind of dread getting in the shower sometimes, because it's like I feel so disconnected, right? Because I'm always running, and I'm like, wow, I'm going to miss that phone call, or I'm not going to be able to, type something, or, and I can't do all the things I want to do right now because I have to take a shower. So, but once I'm in there, there's nothing else for me to do. And I finally give my mind a chance for that 15 minutes to not do anything. And so that's, I think, must be the key for me, is that I physically cannot do anything.
All right. And well, I think it's a different, I feel like don't get me wrong, it's the same sort of concept, but I feel it's on a smaller level when you're in the
Right.
shower. I feel like when
Yes.
you're in the float tank or you're floating in the ocean or whatever
Right.
you choose, right?
Imagine what I could do then, right?
Exactly. It's like 100 times. So you need to get in a float tank.
Yes, that's it.
I want one for my house, but I can't afford it. But if you ever decide you want to give me one, that'd be cool.
I can't afford not to have one. So we just finished writing a book, 2 years, and anytime I have any problem that I'm trying to solve of a creative nature, I go into the tank. I used to always work on it, but now I don't even work on it. But by the time I am getting out or I'm in the shower, it just gets downloaded to me.
Right. That's awesome.
And that's really incredible.
That is.
So I can't afford not to have one.
So let me ask you, there are places where people can go, right, to access this.
Yes.
Where would someone find those places? What should they think about when they're looking for one? Is there anything that, we should let the audience know about if they're going to try out a float tank?
Well, I mentioned the most important thing is that they should know that they should should do it in a way that's comfortable for them. So that's the most important thing. Uh, I think it's best if they can find a place that has a samadhi tank, because
I agree.
our focus with designing and producing tanks is to make them as distraction free as possible. And we've been working on this for 48 years. And we make ours in a very different way than most of them are made. Most of them are egg shaped out of fiberglass. And and it's very difficult. We've twice made the tanks out of fiberglass, and it's just about impossible to make them light proof. Now, in a center, you perhaps don't have windows, so it's not a problem. You can turn off the light in a room. But in a home situation, you may not want to blacken out your windows. Anyway, we think ours are significantly more distraction free than any other tanks. So it's nice if you can find that. But generally, every place is going to be clean and the people are really nice. And most towns and cities have them now. Just look for a flotation tank. Some people refer to them as sensory deprivation tank, which we consider to be a misnomer, but you can look for that too.
So now you mentioned different types of tanks, right? Because I've seen some, and I like it just complete silence, complete darkness, right? There are some people that like listen to music, and they have lights and things like that in them. Does that really? To me, that changes the whole concept of it, right? I mean, for me, to just sort of zone out if there's other things going on,
Yes, Brian, I'm a purist as well. We don't even have the speakers in the tanks at the tank at our home, in our bedroom, and but some people like that. Why not do sitting meditation if you want distractions?
Right.
But that's my
preference.
biased opinion.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm a purist with it.
So what else do you want to tell us? And what else is there? I know you were working, you mentioned a book that you had written 2 years ago, right? Just about 2
No,
years?
the last 2 years.
You've been writing it over the last 2 years.
Yes.
Is it out yet?
Yes, it just got printed, and it's called Floating in Quiet Darkness. And the last third of it is actually other people's experiences, how different people use the tank. The one thing about this floating is that there are many, many different ways of using it for many different purposes. Everything from jet lag to creativity, and so on. And by reading how other people use the tank, you can see that we think you should go in and just use it in whatever way you want to. Don't be programmed by other people. When I made the first prototype, a friend of mine came and floated. He was the first person to float. And I told him at the end of an hour, I'd knock and let him know his time was up. And I knocked and he said, well, let me have a whole hour. And I said, your hour is up. He said, no, can't be. Anyway, he then went on to tell his friend about it, and she came and floated. And after I knocked and she got out, and we were sharing her experience. She said, you know, just as you knocked, I figured the time was up. So he had told her about how quickly time went. And so she spent part of her time in there being a clock instead of having her own experience. And so we think that people should not be programmed. That was the one thing that John suggested, is don't program other people. And we've rigorously followed that for many years.
It's pretty cool.
I'm
But
I'm not doing it today, but
yeah, time definitely gets lost when you're floating. Like it runs at its, and Nicolette will tell you, because I talk about time all the time, but it runs at its own pace, when you're in a meditative state. So
yes.
Well, Glenn, where can everybody find this book? Can you let us know where we can find it?
You can find it on our website, samadhitank.com. That's spelled SAMADHITANK.com, or you can find it on Amazon. And it tells about our 48-year history. We've gone into all the difficulties that we had starting an industry that nobody knew about. When we first used to tell people about the tank, they would say, why would you want to do that? And so we had to change how we said things so that people were interested in doing it, rather than wondering, why on earth would anybody do that? And now it's a worldwide phenomena. There's a big float industry, and it is becoming very popular. And so we've gone through all the problems in the book of having to make that happen, of how we made that happen.
it's very, very cool, Glenn. Thank you for dedicating like all the time and research and engineering into it. It's changed a lot of people's lives.
Thank
And
you.
I feel relaxed just talking with you. I got to be honest, you're the most chilled human I've ever met. So this is a very relaxing conversation. I appreciate that, because every other part of the day is so much.
She's just saying she has to deal with me all day long. That's just saying.
Well, I really believe that's a testament to the tank, right? I mean, if this is the personality that this can create or has the potential to create, that's pretty cool.
Yes. It's what's amazing is that I was born in 1941. The tank was invented. John invented the isolation tank in 1954 to see whether the brain would go to sleep when it was deprived of outside input, which is what the prevalent scientific point of view was at the time. And so 3 years after I was born in 1944, my father was a fox farmer, and all the fox pelts were always sold at an auction once a year in New York City. And that year, one of his pelts sold for the most money of any farmer, any pelt. And in 1953, 10 years later, I wrote an article in junior high about my father doing this. That was a year before the tank was invented. And he sold that pelt to I.J. Fox. So that was in 53. In 74, I met Lee. And the next year, I happened to be coming across this article that I wrote, and she said, I.J. Fox, that's my sister's company. So my father, years before the tank was invented, had sold a pelt to her family. And I think, to me, that shows that we were destined, Lee and I were destined to be doing this together. And John Lilly said that there is something called ECHO, Earth Coincidence Control Office. And Earth Coincidence Control Office does all the long-term coincidences, and we do the short ones. And that shows that ECHO does the long-term coincidences. So I thought that's how come that whole thing happened. And we had nothing to do with it. It's like it was in the stars.
Yeah, it was that cosmic intelligence trying to connect you guys at some point, you know? It was the start of it. You guys didn't know yet, but it was the start of it.
Yeah. And that's another thing about floating, is if you are constantly moving your consciousness from the mental chatter into the heart, then, and being present, the more times you're touching spirit, the more spirit is going to happen to you, the more coincidences are going to happen, the more things will work the way they're supposed to happen. I'm sure you both have that experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep. Well, Glenn, we thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we're very excited to get this out this week so that everybody can learn about this, because I just was educated very much. So we thank you so much, and we will put all of those links that Glenn mentioned to the book and to the site in the description, so everybody can learn more about Glenn and the float tank as well.
And thank you so much, Glenn, for your life's work on this. It's amazing.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks.